You might have heard the Miami Dolphins are in search of their next defensive coordinator. And on today's show, we are going to take a deep dive into each and every candidate that has interviewed or is scheduled to interview with the Miami Dolphins for that new defensive coordinator. As we've been saying, out with the old, in with the new. Goodbye, Vic Fangio. It wasn't meant to be. And it's time to unpack who we think might be the best fit in Miami. So there's a huge board of Dolphins defensive coordinator candidates. Some of these guys have interviewed, and when you go down the list, the only one you can completely cross off in Sharpie is Bobby Babich, who accepted the Bills defensive coordinator job. But BRandon Staley, that's a guy to keep your eye on. It's probably my number one choice if there's a hire outside of the coaching staff and outside of the organization. Because you look at Anthony Campanile and Ryan Slowik collectively, they coach the linebackers for the Dolphins. Campanile, the inside linebackers coach. Slowik, the outside linebackers coach. And if you watch Hard Knocks, you know Campanile can get the guys going. He gets the people going. Definitely has that camaraderie with the players, and the motivational factor is there. Slowik also has a resume that certainly deems worthy of being considered for a defensive coordinator spot. But let's start with BRandon Staley, because if you took just a blank resume and you put the blindfold over it so you don't know who you're talking about, take off the name at the top, I would probably say BRandon Staley has the most impressive resume, and for that reason, might be the number one target for the Dolphins. He's the Chargers head coach for from 2021 to 2023. Obviously, it didn't really work out. But when he was the defensive coordinator with the Rams in 2020, he was tremendous. And part of that tremendous defense were guys like Jalen Ramsey. So obviously there's a level of continuity there between BRandon Staley and current Dolphins cornerback Jalen Ramsey. And oh yeah, he's also in contact with Mike McDaniel because they have the same agent. There's a level of chemistry there, and the two of them, I would say, are more than just acquaintances when you share the same agent. That's certainly a commonality. But it's not just the Miami Dolphins that are after BRandon Staley as a potential defensive coordinator. Yesterday, Ian Rappaport, an NFL insider, tweeting out that former Chargers coach BRandon Staley is scheduled to interview with the Rams tomorrow for their defensive coordinator job, formerly held by Raheem Morris, who obviously is now the Falcons head coach. And sources say Staley is a top defensive coordinator available and has considerable interest, which, if you think about it from a Dolphins perspective, if he's interested in the Rams and they have interest in him, then maybe you start moving away from BRandon Staley as your number one candidate, because whoever becomes the Dolphins' next defensive coordinator has to want to be there and can't just be brought in, and then you run the risk of the turnover like you had with Vic Fangio. But the Rams certainly have every reason to target BRandon Staley as their next defensive coordinator, because when he was there in 2020, look at the numbers. It is impressive in every sense of the word. They were the number one defense in the NFL under BRandon Staley in 2020. First in passing yards allowed, first in passing touchdowns allowed. They really locked down the opposition. Third in rushing yards allowed, and sixth in rushing touchdowns allowed. So whether you're talking pass defense or run defense, BRandon Staley put together and orchestrated a top caliber defense in 2020 as the defensive coordinator for the Rams. Now, thinking about where both these franchises are right now, Miami Dolphins and the LA Rams, both coming off first-round playoff exits, but both making the playoffs, I got to ask you this. If Staley is offered both defensive coordinator jobs, which one would he take? Very interesting question. If you think it's Miami, go ahead and type MIA for the Dolphins. If you think it's the Rams, go ahead and type LAR. It's our pinned comment for today, so let me know what you think down in the comments. For me, I honestly think if you look at it objectively, the Dolphins' defensive coordinating job is very appealing. When you look at the playmakers, Jalen Ramsey is a guy you can plan a defense around. When the edge rushers are healthy, we saw what this Dolphins pass rush did. They were third in total sacks and second in pass rush win rate. So there are two appealing components to taking the Dolphins' defensive coordinating job. I also think it's a roster that's in win now mode. Not to say that the Rams aren't. Again, both teams coming off playoff appearances, but first-round playoff exits. And so, obviously, I've got my Dolphins Today glasses on, and I'd say I'd take the Miami job, and maybe it's a little bit different as far as the climate. You got a warm weather climate on the West Coast in Los Angeles. You got the same thing on the East Coast in Miami. So at some point, BRandon Staley would have to choose. There is the level of familiarity with being the Rams defensive coordinator that he was in 2020. But if I'm BRandon Staley, you got the opportunity to coach with Mike McDaniel, a close personal friend of yours, as well as a loaded roster on the defensive side that's ready to win now. Hey, BRandon Staley, if that job's offered for you, sign on the dotted line. We'd love to have you in Miami. Now, speaking of Miami, an internal hire makes a lot of sense in my mind as well. Dolphins linebacker coach Anthony Campanile is certainly one of the more appealing options. And since he's been with Miami since 2020, you've seen him bond with a lot of the players, especially on the defensive side. We saw that on Hard Knocks. And he also has collegiate level experience coaching with Michigan, Boston College, and Rutgers, and was a candidate for the Dolphins defensive coordinator job last year when they elected to go with Vic Fangio. So if you're Mike McDaniel, you're the Dolphins front office, you think, hey, if this guy was a realistic candidate last year, one more year of experience, one more year of growing within the organization, it makes a lot of sense to promote Anthony Campanile to defensive coordinator. And you might even make the same case for another internal candidate in hiring Ryan Slowik, the current outside linebacker coach for the Miami Dolphins, who has spent the last 2 seasons with Miami, and before that, spent some time with the Browns as an outside linebacker coach, and even spent some time in the collegiate ranks as well as a defensive analyst for the Tennessee Volunteers in 2017. And again, I don't want to take too much away from the hard knock scenes, but when you saw Ryan Slowik in action, you saw him working with guys like Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips before he got hurt, Andrew Van Ginkel. Those are 3 guys at his position group that had breakout years. And so obviously he's getting through to the players. He has a way to connect with the players, and I think that's a huge component to being a defensive coordinator in this league, in addition to having the mindset of the X's and O's and to be able to devise a scheme that puts your players in the best position to make plays. So that makes a lot of sense as well. So we got 3 very viable candidates here. I want you to pick a defensive coordinator for me. Write down in the comments if it's BRandon Staley, type BS. If it's Anthony Campanile, type AC. Or Ryan Slowik, go ahead and type RS. Obviously, AC and RS being the internal hires, BS being an external hire as he comes over formerly as the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, I think ultimately I'm pointing out the obvious here, but Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel have to get this hire right. You can't stress it enough, because what seemed like the right hire with Vic Fangio took less than a year for it to completely unravel and it be the wrong hire. And I think when you have the turnover at the coordinating positions, it sets the franchise back, and the Dolphins can ill afford to do that. So ensuring that this hire is 100% foolproof, 100% correct, has to be at the absolute top of the priority list for Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel. All right, coming up, we've got more candidates to run through. Those were just my top 3, but there are plenty more to take a deep dive on, so we'll do that next. But first, I got to tell you about today's proud presenting sponsor, America's #1 meal delivery service. And yes, you know by now, it is Factor, and Factor's helping you make the best choices in 2024. And here we are, almost all the way through the month, heading into February, and Factor is here to help you with those New Year's resolutions and helping you get started on them with ready-to-eat meal delivery service that takes the stress out of meal prepping and sets you up for success in the new year. So say goodbye to annoying trips to the grocery store. I can't stand those, by the way. Say goodbye to the meal prep work. Say goodbye to all the containers that you've got all over your fridge from meal prepping. No. Say goodbye to the cooking fatigue as well. And, say goodbye to dishes, too, because with Factor, the meals are delivered straight to your door. You can't make this up. It is 100% convenient, and it is incredible as far as utilizing the meal delivery service. It takes just 2 minutes to heat up. There's no dishes, and the meals are delicious, fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved. I love the red pepper filet. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. And oh yeah, the Chipotle pork chop. I don't know if that one's on there, but it is to die for. And don't forget about the 55 weekly add-ons. That includes smoothies. The smoothies are delicious as well. But don't take my word for it. Head to factormeals.com/FinSchat50 and use code FinSchat50 to get 50% off. That's code FinSchat50. Factormeals.com/FinSchat50 to get 50% off. What do I always tell you? We love you and we care about you. So we'll put that link right in the comments of today's video. And check it out, factormeals.com/FinSchat50 for 50% off. All right, we've got more candidates to evaluate and determine who might be the best fit for the Miami Dolphins. And as I mentioned, this is a very, very, very thorough search from the Miami Dolphins because they have a lot of candidates to ensure they hire the right one. Let's take a look at Leslie Frazier. He interviewed with the Miami Dolphins, and he was the former defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. Again, another guy that boasts an extremely impressive resume. He's been coaching in the NFL since 1999, as well as spending some time with the Baltimore Ravens and Tampa Bay Buccaneers as the defensive coordinator. So again, it's a guy that has a proven track record. He can relate with players, but it's an external hire that hasn't been a defensive coordinator in the NFL this past season. Don't forget, he was also the Vikings head coach. So he has some head coaching experience just like BRandon Staley does. So you bring in a guy that has a really impressive resume, but can he connect and relate to the players? The Dolphins also interviewed Chris Kiffin. And that's right, you might recognize the last name because he's the son of Monty Kiffin and the brother of Lane Kiffin, the head coach at Ole Miss. A football family, you got to love that. He's been with the Texans since 2023 as their linebacker coach. So again, no coordinating experience, but a long resume of NFL experience that includes being the defensive line coach for the Cleveland Browns from 2020 to 2022, and also spent time with San Francisco as their pass rush specialist from 2018 to 2019. So Kiffin kind of represents that guy that's working his way up and has had success at each level of coaching that he's been at, and now to become a defensive coordinator in the NFL would be a huge step. But again, you know, he comes from a football family from Monty Kiffin and the one and only Lane Kiffin. How about Anthony Weaver? Now, here's a guy that also represents exactly what you're looking for in a defensive coordinator, the defensive line coach for the Baltimore Ravens. And like a lot of teams, the Baltimore Ravens as a franchise have the reputation for doing things right in all aspects. And this is a guy that's coached in the NFL since 2012. And has been with the Baltimore Ravens since 2021. He's had a couple of different roles that includes the run game coordinator, as well as the associate head coach and the defensive line coach. So when you think about a guy that also has the leadership and administrative qualities to add to his resume, with Anthony Weaver being an associate head coach, I think that bodes well for him in the interview process as well. So if you're Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier, that's another one that you take note of as, hey, here's a guy that's been an associate head coach for a really well-run organization like the Baltimore Ravens. Certainly something to consider. So take a deep breath with me, and once again, let me know down in the comments how you feel about the Dolphins front office to get this hire right. What is your confidence level in the Dolphins to get the DC hire right? Scale it for me, 1 through 100. If you're 100% confident that the Dolphins will exceed our expectations with this hire, go ahead and type 100. If you've got no hope whatsoever in Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier, type 1. Either way, let me know down in the comments. Because we don't want a Vic Fangio situation with this hire, because Vic Fangio, he wasn't going to go out quietly. Obviously, a week ago, he becomes the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, but he spoke out about what he really thought about the Dolphins and their organization and their players, and questioned their commitment and work ethic. Now, this is Ron Jaworski speaking, who is great friends with Vic Fangio. Ron Jaworski went on a sports talk radio station in Philadelphia talking about Vic Fangio becoming the defensive coordinator. So I think the context is important to reiterate that this is Jaws almost speaking for Vic Fangio, but Jaws said there were some players on that defense, referring to Miami's defense, that didn't want to work, didn't want to put in the effort, didn't want to put the time in. Guys like to party at night. Those are the guys that are whining right now. So leave it to Jaws. I love Jaws. I think he's hilarious. I think he's a good NFL analyst. He knows the game. But I also think this might be a case of him backing his friend up, right? And we know there's two sides to every single story. So I found it very intriguing what Albert Breer, an NFL insider, and the senior editor of the Monday Morning Quarterback had to say about Vic Fangio's departure. Get a load of this. He went on to say Vic Fangio's one-voice approach to running the defensive war on coaches. An example being that he didn't allow position coaches to present their work to the defense, instead gathering information from them and doing it himself. That sort of approach is decidedly old school and seeped through to players who by the end of Vic Fangio's time tuned him out. So I think that's really important to know as well, that Albert Breer, from his perspective as an NFL insider, is saying players were tuning Vic Fangio out because he was too old school. And I think that's what we identified as the underlying problem between Fangio and Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins as a whole. It was old school versus new school. And when you stunt the growth of your assistant coaches and you don't have that collaborative environment, I think that seeps down as well. So two sides to every story. It is what it is. Vic Fangio's gone. He's off to Philadelphia, and I think it's best for both parties to move on. And with that, we are excited for who the Dolphins might hire as their next defensive coordinator for the upcoming season. All right, what a season it's been for Dolphins today. We have my first football season in the books as we are into the offseason. So we did a little number crunching exercise, and I think everybody deserves to know how great of a season it was from Dolphins today. We gained over 12,000 new subscribers this season. That's a testament to each and every one of you, which we certainly appreciate. And I said for the offseason, we've got some lofty goals in mind, because right now, our current sub base is 55,480, and we're setting an offseason goal to get up to 58,000 subscribers. And you know what? I kind of want to stretch that into 60, because 60,000 sounds really good. It's a nice round number, and it's less math for me to do, that type of thing. 60,000. Can we get there? I certainly think so. So if you know another Dolphins fan, make sure you subscribe and let them know how they can have endless Dolphins content and enjoy each and every angle of the Miami Dolphins.